Sarah walked through the glass doors of Elite Fitness Center for the first time, her worn sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. The gym was nothing like the small community center where she used to exercise. Everything here gleamed under bright lights, chrome machines, mirrors covering every wall, and expensive equipment she had never seen before. She clutched her old gym bag tighter as she approached the front desk. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly styled hair and makeup that looked like it belonged in a magazine, barely looked up from her phone. "Can I help you?" she asked with a tone that suggested helping was the last thing she wanted to do. "I'd like to sign up for a membership," Sarah said quietly. She had saved for months to afford this place, taking extra shifts at the diner where she worked as a waitress. The gym was expensive, but it was the only one in town with proper weightlifting equipment. The receptionist finally looked up, her eyes scanning Sarah from head to toe. Sarah became painfully aware of her appearance, her faded t-shirt from a charity run 3 years ago, her old jeans with a small hole near the knee, and her simple ponytail held together with a rubber band she had found in her kitchen drawer. "This is a premium facility," the receptionist said slowly, as if explaining to a child. "Our monthly rates start at $200, plus initiation fees and equipment charges." She slid a price sheet across the counter, her long acrylic nails tapping impatiently. Sarah had already researched the prices online. She pulled out an envelope from her bag, containing exactly the amount needed for 3 months up front. "I have the money," she said, counting out the bills carefully. The receptionist's eyebrows rose slightly, but she processed the payment with obvious reluctance. "You'll need to complete these forms," she said, pushing a clipboard towards Sarah. "The locker rooms are down that hall, and please familiarize yourself with our dress code." Her eyes lingered disapprovingly on Sarah's simple outfit. As Sarah filled out the paperwork, she could hear the receptionist whispering to a personal trainer who had appeared at the desk. Their words weren't meant for her ears, but she caught fragments. "Doesn't fit the clientele and might not last long." Sarah pretended not to hear. She had faced worse than whispered comments. Growing up in a trailer park, working multiple jobs since she was 16, and putting herself through community college had taught her to ignore people who judged based on appearances. She handed back the completed forms and received her temporary membership card. The gym was busier than she had expected for a Tuesday morning. Most of the cardio machines were occupied by women in expensive athletic wear, their hair perfectly styled even during workouts. The weight area was dominated by men in designer gym clothes, their protein shakers bearing logos of supplements that cost more than Sarah's weekly grocery budget. Sarah made her way to the women's locker room to change. The space was luxurious compared to what she was used to: marble countertops, individual vanity areas, and lockers that looked like small apartments. She quickly changed into her workout clothes, conscious that her plain black leggings and gray t-shirt looked shabby compared to the colorful, form-fitting outfits around her. When she emerged, she headed straight for the free weight section. This was why she was here. The dumbbells at her old gym only went up to 50 pounds, and she had outgrown them months ago. She needed heavier weights to continue progressing with her training. As she approached the weight area, conversation seemed to quiet down. She could feel eyes following her movement. A group of women on the leg press machine stopped their workout to watch. Their stares weren't curious or welcoming. They were assessing, judging, finding her lacking. "Excuse me, miss," a male trainer approached her. He was tall, muscular, and wore a shirt with his name Brad embroidered on it. "Are you sure you're in the right area? The cardio machines and group fitness classes are more suitable for beginners." His smile was patronizing, the kind adults use when talking to children who have wandered into the wrong room. "I'm here to lift weights," Sarah replied calmly. She had learned long ago that the best response to condescension was quiet confidence. Brad's smile widened, but his eyes remained cold. "I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this equipment requires proper form and experience. We wouldn't want you to hurt yourself. Perhaps I could interest you in our beginner's package. It includes nutritional counseling and basic fitness classes." Behind him, several gym members had stopped their workouts to listen. Sarah could see smirks on some faces, phones being discreetly positioned to record what they expected to be an embarrassing moment. "I've been lifting weights for 2 years," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the growing audience. "I know what I'm doing." A woman in expensive athletic wear laughed out loud. 2 years? At Planet Fitness doesn't count, sweetie. Her comment drew chuckles from her friends, all of whom looked like they had stepped out of a fitness magazine. Brad held up his hand for silence, but his expression showed he agreed with the woman's assessment. Look, I'm sure you've done your best with whatever equipment you had access to, but this is serious equipment for serious athletes. The barbells alone weigh 45 pounds before you add any plates. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, but not from embarrassment, from anger. These people had taken one look at her and decided she didn't belong. They had judged her based on her clothes, her background, and their own prejudices about who deserved to be in their exclusive space. I understand, she said quietly. Could you please show me where the deadlift platform is? The request caught Brad off guard. Most beginners asked about treadmills or basic machines, not specialized equipment for one of the most challenging lifts in weightlifting. The deadlift platform? He repeated, uncertainty creeping into his voice. Yes, Sarah said, adjusting her gym bag. I prefer to start my workouts with compound movements. The technical terminology surprised him further. He pointed toward the back corner of the gym where a rubber platform sat surrounded by bumper plates and Olympic barbells. It was the most intimidating area of the gym, typically used only by the most experienced lifters. As Sarah walked toward the platform, she could hear the whispered comments following her. This should be good. Someone call the medics, and I can't wait to see this disaster. She reached the platform and set down her bag, ignoring the growing audience that had gathered at a safe distance. Some were openly recording now, expecting to capture her failure for social media entertainment. Sarah looked at the barbell, then at the weight plates stacked nearby. She had work to do, and no amount of mockery was going to stop her from doing it. Sarah began her warm-up routine, completely ignoring the crowd that had gathered to watch her anticipated failure. She started with dynamic stretches, her movements precise and purposeful. This wasn't the fumbling of a beginner. Every motion was deliberate, practiced, and showed years of experience. The whispering grew louder as people tried to make sense of what they were seeing. She actually knows what she's doing, one man admitted reluctantly to his workout partner. But his tone suggested this only made the situation more interesting, like watching a car accident in slow motion. Brad, the trainer, hovered nearby with his arms crossed. He had called over 2 other trainers ostensibly for safety reasons, but really because he wanted witnesses to what he was certain would be an embarrassing display. This is liability nightmare, he muttered to his colleagues. When she hurts herself, the gym could be sued. Sarah loaded the barbell with 45 pounds on each side, 95 pounds total. To most of the observers, it looked like a substantial amount of weight. The women from the leg press machines had moved closer, some taking seats on nearby equipment to get a better view of the show. 95 pounds, scoffed the woman in expensive athletic wear, whom Sarah had learned was named Madison, from her loud conversations with friends. I could probably lift that much. Big deal. Madison was a real estate agent who had married well and spent her days in boutique fitness classes. Her idea of heavy lifting was 5-pound dumbbells during her Pilates sessions. Sarah positioned herself at the barbell, her feet hip-width apart, toes pointed slightly outward. She bent at the hips and knees, gripping the bar with both hands. Her back was straight, shoulders back, eyes focused forward. The form was textbook perfect. She lifted the weight smoothly, standing up straight with the barbell. The lift was controlled, steady, and made 95 pounds look effortless. She held the position for a moment before lowering the weight back to the platform with precision. The crowd was quieter now. That wasn't the clumsy attempt they had expected, but 95 pounds was still within the realm of what they considered reasonable for someone her size, even if they wouldn't admit it out loud. Beginner's luck, someone whispered, but the comment lacked conviction. Sarah added 10 pounds to each side, bringing the total to 115 pounds. Again, she executed the lift perfectly, her breathing controlled, her form unchanged. The weight moved as smoothly as the lighter load had. Brad stepped forward, his protective instincts kicking in despite his earlier dismissiveness. That's probably enough for your first day, he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. You don't want to overdo it and get injured. Sarah looked at him calmly. I'm just getting started, she replied, adding another 10 pounds to each side. The barbell now held 135 pounds, more weight than many of the gym's male members could lift properly. A hush fell over the crowd. 135 pounds was entering serious territory. This wasn't typical beginner weight anymore. Even the men who had been snickering were paying closer attention now. Sarah approached the barbell again. Her ritual was the same: positioning, grip, stance, focus. But now there was something different in the air. The mockery had transformed into genuine curiosity mixed with disbelief. She lifted 135 pounds as smoothly as she had lifted 95. If anything, she looked more comfortable with the heavier weight, as if the previous lifts had been too light to showcase her proper form. "Holy shit," someone whispered, immediately looking around to make sure management hadn't heard the profanity. Madison's face had changed from smirking superiority to genuine confusion. "How is she doing that?" she asked her friends, as if Sarah's success was some kind of trick that needed explaining. The answer came from Jake, one of the gym's most experienced members. He was a power lifter who competed at the state level and had been quietly watching from across the room. "She knows what she's doing," he said simply. "Look at her form, her breathing, the way she sets up. This isn't her first time under a barbell." But even Jake looked surprised when Sarah began loading more weight onto the bar. She added 25 pounds to each side, bringing the total to 185 pounds. This was more than most of the men in the gym could deadlift, and substantially more than any woman they had ever seen attempt. The crowd had grown larger now. Word was spreading throughout the gym that something unusual was happening in the back corner. People were abandoning their cardio machines and cutting short their sets to see what the commotion was about. Brad was no longer offering advice or expressing concern about liability. He was staring at Sarah with the same fascination as everyone else. As a certified personal trainer, he recognized technical proficiency when he saw it, and Sarah's technique was flawless. Sarah chalked her hands, a sign that she was taking the lift seriously. The chalk left white marks on the barbell where her grip would be, and seeing it somehow made the moment feel more official, more real. She positioned herself once more. The routine was identical: stance, grip, setup, focus. But now the silence was complete. Even the background music seemed quieter. 25 people were holding their breath, waiting to see if this ordinary-looking woman could lift an extraordinary amount of weight. Sarah pulled. The barbell rose from the platform smoothly, steadily, inexorably. 85 pounds moved as if it weighed half that amount. She stood tall, holding the weight for a moment that seemed to last forever, then lowered it with complete control. The silence stretched for several seconds after the weights touched down. Then Jake began clapping slowly, deliberately. "That was beautiful," he said, his voice carrying the respect of one lifter for another. But not everyone was ready to acknowledge what they had witnessed. Madison stepped forward, her face flushed with something between anger and embarrassment. "So what?" she said loudly. "Anyone can lift heavy once. It doesn't mean anything. Probably injured herself and doesn't even know it yet." Her friends nodded agreement, clinging to their preconceptions despite the evidence in front of them. "She's probably on steroids," one suggested. "Or she's been lying about being a beginner." Sarah heard every word, but her expression didn't change. She was used to people finding excuses to dismiss her accomplishments. She had been underestimated her entire life, by teachers who assumed she wasn't college material because of where she lived, by employers who thought her quiet demeanor meant she lacked ambition, by dates who expected her to be impressed by their obvious wealth and status. She began loading more weight onto the barbell. This time she added a 45-pound plate to each side, bringing the total to 275 pounds. The number was written in chalk on the side of the plates, impossible to miscalculate or dismiss. The crowd pressed closer, but also stepped back, as if the weight itself was dangerous. 275 pounds was serious weight, the kind that required years of training to handle safely. "She can't possibly," Madison began. But her voice trailed off as Sarah completed her setup routine with the same calm precision she had shown throughout her workout. This time, when Sarah pulled, there was a moment of resistance. The weight was heavy enough that it challenged her, heavy enough that her effort was visible in her face and body, but the barbell still rose, still moved steadily upward, still responded to her will and strength. When she completed the lift and lowered the weight, the silence was absolute. Even the gym's background music seemed to have stopped. Sarah stood up, dusted the chalk from her hands, and looked around at the crowd that had gathered to watch her fail. The crowd stood frozen, staring at Sarah as if she had just performed magic. 275 pounds lay on the platform, the barbell still vibrating slightly from the controlled descent. Some people blinked repeatedly as if trying to clear their vision and make sense of what they had witnessed. Jake was the first to break the silence. "That's more than I lifted when I started competing," he said, shaking his head in amazement. "Where did you train before this?" Sarah wiped her hands on her towel, her breathing steady despite the heavy lift. "Community center downtown," she replied simply. They had an old barbell set in the basement. The answer hung in the air like an accusation. The community center downtown was where low-income families went for programs they couldn't afford elsewhere. It was the opposite of elite fitness center in every way. Old equipment, cramped spaces, peeling paint on the walls, and a membership that cost $20 a month. Madison's face had gone from flushed to pale. She had built her entire identity around exclusivity, the right clothes, the right neighborhood, the right gym membership. The idea that someone from the community center could outperform her in her own expensive sanctuary was more than she could process. "That's impossible," she said, her voice higher than usual. "Their equipment is garbage. You can't train properly with broken-down weights and rusty bars." Sarah looked at her calmly. "The weights don't know how much you paid for them," she said. 200 pounds feels the same whether you lift it here or anywhere else." The simple truth of the statement made several people uncomfortable. They had paid premium prices for this gym, partly because it made them feel superior to people who couldn't afford it. Sarah's presence and ability challenged that entire worldview. Brad, who had been standing silently since Sarah's last lift, finally found his voice. "How long have you been lifting?" he asked. His tone had completely changed from condescending to genuinely curious. 2 years seriously," Sarah replied. "But I grew up doing physical work. My dad was a carpenter and I helped him on job sites from the time I was 12, carrying lumber, mixing cement, loading trucks. The gym training just made it more focused." Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place for the observers. Sarah's strength wasn't just from 2 years of casual gym membership. It was built on a foundation of real-world physical labor that most of them had never experienced. A young man named Tyler, who'd been filming on his phone, stepped forward. He was an influencer who posted workout videos for his social media followers. "Can you do more?" he asked, his camera still rolling. "Like, what's your max?" The question sent a ripple of excitement through the crowd. They had already seen her lift more than they thought possible. Now they wanted to know just how far her abilities extended. Sarah considered the question. She had been planning to work up to her current max, but she hadn't expected such an audience. The attention made her uncomfortable, but she had come here to train properly, and that meant challenging herself with weight she couldn't handle at her old gym. "I can try," she said quietly, approaching the barbell again. She removed some of the smaller plates and added 2 more 45-pound plates. The bar now held 365 pounds, a weight that would be impressive for most male powerlifters and extraordinary for any woman. The crowd pressed closer, but with more respect now. They had seen enough to know that Sarah wasn't performing for their entertainment. She was training seriously, and they were privileged to witness it. 365, Jake whispered to the person next to him. "I know guys who have been lifting for 5 years who can't pull that much." Sarah's preparation routine was more thorough now. She spent extra time chalking her hands, adjusting her stance, and visualizing the lift. This was close to her maximum, and she knew it would require everything she had. The gym had gone completely quiet. Even the staff had gathered to watch, abandoning their posts at the front desk and juice bar. Someone had turned down the background music without being asked. Sarah gripped the barbell, her knuckles white against the black knurling. She took a deep breath, set her shoulders, and engaged her entire body. This wasn't just about arm and back strength anymore. It required coordination, timing, and mental focus. The weight fought back this time. For a moment after Sarah initiated the pull, the barbell seemed reluctant to leave the platform. There was a pause, a moment of uncertainty where the outcome hung in balance. Then Sarah's years of training and natural strength converged. The weight began to move slowly but steadily. Her face showed the effort now, the concentration, the determination, the sheer force of will required to move 365 pounds against gravity. The barbell passed her knees, the most difficult part of the lift. From there, momentum and leverage worked in her favor. She straightened her hips and stood tall, 365 pounds held securely in her hands. The crowd erupted. Even Madison found herself clapping, caught up in the moment despite her earlier hostility. Tyler kept filming, knowing his video would go viral within hours. But Sarah wasn't finished. After lowering the weight with perfect control, she began adding more plates to the barbell. This time she loaded it to 405 pounds. 4 plates on each side, a weight that represented a significant milestone in powerlifting. "She's going for 400, Jake said, his voice filled with anticipation. "That's elite level for women. Hell, that's respectable for men." The atmosphere had completely changed from mockery to reverence. These people who had gathered to watch her fail were now invested in her success. They wanted to see her complete the lift, to witness something truly extraordinary. Sarah's approach to 405 pounds was different. She took longer to prepare, spending several minutes in quiet focus. She adjusted the barbell's position on the platform, chalked and re-chalked her hands, and practiced her breathing pattern. When she finally gripped the bar, the silence was so complete that people could hear their own heartbeats. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was an athletic performance of the highest caliber. Sarah pulled. The weight was enormous, challenging every fiber of muscle and every aspect of her technique. The barbell moved slower than before, fighting her for every inch of progress. At her knees, the lift stalled. For a terrifying moment, it seemed like the weight might be too much, like she might fail in front of everyone who had doubted her. But Sarah had been lifting heavy things since she was a child. She had carried more than her share of life's burdens, literally and figuratively. 400 pounds was just another weight to move, another obstacle to overcome. She ground through the sticking point with pure determination, her entire body working in harmony to complete the lift. When she locked out at the top, standing tall with 405 pounds in her hands, the crowd's cheer was so loud it echoed off the gym's high ceilings. Sarah held the weight for a moment, not for show but to ensure complete control before lowering it. When the plates touched the platform with a satisfying thud, she stepped back and looked around at the faces surrounding her. They were no longer the same people who had mocked her entrance an hour earlier. Something fundamental had changed, both in how they saw her and how they saw themselves. The applause gradually faded, but the energy in the room remained electric. People who had never spoken to each other were discussing what they had just witnessed. Sarah's 405-pound deadlift had become an instant legend, the kind of gym story that would be told and retold for years. But Sarah wasn't basking in the attention. She was studying the barbell, calculating in her head, preparing for something that would push her beyond anything she had attempted before. The community center's equipment had limited her to 275 pounds maximum. That had been her ceiling for months, the weight that represented the absolute limit of their available plates. Here at Elite Fitness, surrounded by professional-grade equipment and unlimited weight plates, she could finally test her true potential. She had always wondered what she was truly capable of when not constrained by inadequate equipment. Jake approached her during the break, his powerlifter's eye having caught something the casual observers had missed. "You've been holding back," he said. It wasn't a question. Sarah nodded slightly. "I've never had access to this much weight before," she admitted. "The community center maxes out at 275. "So everything we just watched?" Jake paused, recalculating what he thought he understood. "That was just warming up to where you left off at your old gym?" The implications of his realization rippled through the crowd. Sarah hadn't been showing off or performing for their benefit. She had simply been working up to weights that challenged her, just like any serious lifter would do. The extraordinary lifts they had witnessed were, for her, just the beginning of her real workout. Tyler, still recording, moved closer with his phone. His social media brain was already composing captions and hashtags, recognizing that he was documenting something genuinely special. But he also sensed that Sarah was preparing for something even more impressive. "What's next?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah didn't answer immediately. She was loading the barbell methodically, adding weight with the precision of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. 2 more 45-pound plates joined the stack on each side, bringing the total to 495 pounds. The number sent a shock through the crowd. 495 pounds was approaching the realm of professional powerlifters and strongman competitors. It was weight that required not just strength, but years of specific training, perfect technique, and mental fortitude that came from pushing physical limits regularly. That's 5 plates, someone whispered, as if speaking louder might somehow make the weight heavier. Madison, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since Sarah's 405-pound lift, finally found her voice. But the mocking tone was gone, replaced by something closer to awe mixed with confusion. "This doesn't make sense," she said to her friends. "People like her aren't supposed to be able to do things like this." The comment revealed more about Madison's worldview than she probably intended. In her mind, strength and athletic ability were supposed to correlate with social status and economic privilege. The idea that someone from the community center could outperform everyone at their exclusive gym challenged her fundamental assumptions about how the world worked. Brad, meanwhile, was experiencing his own crisis of understanding. As a certified trainer, he prided himself on being able to assess people's abilities quickly and accurately. His initial dismissal of Sarah had been based on visual cues he had learned to trust: clothing, posture, confidence level, and social markers that usually predicted athletic performance. Sarah's display had shattered that predictive model completely. She had forced him to confront the possibility that his professional judgments were based more on prejudice than expertise. Sarah completed her preparation ritual, which had become more elaborate as the weights increased. She spent several minutes in mental preparation, visualizing the lift from start to finish. She adjusted her stance multiple times, finding the exact position that would optimize her leverage and power. The crowd had grown to include nearly everyone in the gym. Even people who had been in the middle of their own workouts had abandoned their exercises to witness what was happening at the deadlift platform. The atmosphere was tense with anticipation and disbelief. When Sarah finally gripped the barbell, her hands looked small against the massive weight. 495 pounds represented more than 3 times her body weight, a ratio that would be impressive for an elite athlete of any size. The silence was absolute as she began her pull. This time everyone could see that the weight was truly challenging her. Her face showed intense concentration, every muscle in her body engaged in the effort to move the enormous load. The barbell lifted off the platform slowly, almost reluctantly. Sarah's technique remained perfect despite the massive weight, her back straight, shoulders back, the bar path vertical and true. But the speed was dramatically reduced from her earlier lifts. At mid-shin level, the lift stalled again. The weight seemed to anchor itself to the platform, refusing to continue upward. Sarah's entire body strained against the resistance, her legs driving into the floor, her back and arms locked in perfect position. For several seconds, the outcome remained uncertain. The barbell trembled slightly, caught between Sarah's determination and gravity's relentless pull. The crowd held its collective breath, some people unconsciously leaning forward as if they could help lift the weight through sheer will. Then Sarah did something that demonstrated the depth of her training and mental toughness. Instead of giving up or letting the weight crash back down, she reset her position mid-lift. Without releasing the barbell, she adjusted her grip slightly and recommitted to the pull with even greater intensity. The weight began moving again, passing through her knees and approaching the final phase of the lift. Sarah's face was a mask of concentration and determination, her entire being focused on the single goal of standing up with 495 pounds in her hands. When she finally achieved lockout, standing tall with the enormous weight, the crowd's reaction was unlike anything the gym had ever experienced. The cheering was so loud that it could be heard in the parking lot, drawing curious glances from people walking by outside. But even as she held the weight triumphantly, Sarah's eyes were already moving to the remaining plates on the weight tree. She had lifted 495 pounds, but there was still one more milestone within reach, the mythical 500-pound barrier that separated good lifters from great ones. As she lowered the 495 pounds with perfect control, several people in the crowd realized that she wasn't finished. They had witnessed something extraordinary, but Sarah was preparing to attempt something that would transcend extraordinary and enter the realm of legendary. The gym fell silent again as Sarah began loading the final plates onto the barbell. When she stepped back, the weight read 500 pounds even, 10 plates, 5 on each side, representing the absolute pinnacle of deadlift achievement for most lifters. Jake, who had been speechless since the 405-pound lift, finally managed to speak. 500 pounds, he said, his voice filled with reverence. I know professional powerlifters who have trained their entire lives and never pulled 500 pounds. The weight looked enormous on the platform, almost comically large compared to Sarah's relatively small frame, but she approached it with the same calm confidence she had shown throughout her workout, as if the number on the plates was irrelevant to her determination to lift it. Sarah stood before the loaded barbell, 500 pounds of iron plates stacked impossibly high on each side. The weight seemed to dominate the entire platform, casting shadows that made it appear even more massive. Around her, the crowd had grown to include not just gym members but staff, trainers, and even people who had wandered in from the street after hearing the commotion. The moment felt sacred, like standing at the edge of something that would change everything. Sarah had never attempted 500 pounds before. It had been beyond the realm of possibility at the community center. She wasn't even sure she could lift it, but she had learned long ago that the only way to discover your limits was to test them. Tyler continued filming, his hands trembling slightly from excitement and the realization that he was documenting something that would be shared millions of times across social media platforms. This wasn't just an impressive gym lift anymore, it was a story about breaking barriers and defying expectations that would resonate far beyond the fitness community. Preparation time stretched longer than before. Sarah's ritual had evolved into something closer to meditation. She closed her eyes, controlling her breathing, visualizing not just the lift but the entire journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought about her childhood, carrying tools for her father at construction sites while other kids played video games. She remembered the condescending looks from college classmates who assumed she was there on charity rather than merit. She recalled the countless times people had underestimated her based on nothing more than her appearance and background. All of those moments had built the strength she needed for this one. When she opened her eyes, something had changed in her expression. The quiet confidence was still there, but now it was backed by something deeper, a recognition that this lift represented more than just moving weight. It was a statement about what was possible when determination met opportunity. "You don't have to do this," Brad said quietly, his earlier condescension replaced by genuine concern. "You've already proven everything you need to prove." Sarah looked at him with a slight smile. "I'm not trying to prove anything to you," she replied. "I'm trying to prove something to myself." The distinction was important. Throughout her workout, the crowd had assumed she was performing for their benefit, trying to earn their respect or admission to their exclusive circle. But Sarah's motivation had always been internal, the simple desire to see what she was capable of when given the right tools. She chalked her hands one final time, the white powder creating a stark contrast against her work-roughened palms. These weren't the soft hands of someone who had lived an easy life, but they were hands that had learned to grip whatever needed to be held, to carry whatever needed to be carried. As she approached the barbell, the crowd instinctively stepped back, creating a larger circle around the platform. The weight seemed to demand respect even from observers. Several people were holding their breath without realizing it. Sarah's grip on the bar was different this time, more deliberate, more committed. She spent extra time finding the exact hand position that would maximize her leverage and comfort. At her knees, the most challenging part of any deadlift, the weight stalled completely. Sarah's body shook with effort, her legs driving into the floor with such force that the rubber platform compressed beneath her feet. The barbell trembled in her hands, caught between her will and the immutable laws of physics. The crowd watched in suspended animation, afraid to breathe or move lest they somehow interfere with the delicate balance of forces playing out before them. Some people found themselves unconsciously mimicking Sarah's pulling motion, as if they could somehow help lift the weight through sympathetic effort. Madison stood transfixed, her earlier hostility completely forgotten. She was witnessing something that challenged every assumption she had made about strength, about worthiness, about who deserved to succeed. Her perfectly manicured hands were clenched into fists, and she realized she was desperately hoping for Sarah to complete the lift. For 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes. The outcome remained uncertain. Sarah's technique remained perfect despite the enormous strain, but the weight seemed determined to defeat her. Her face had turned red with effort, veins visible in her neck and forearms, her entire being focused on the single task of moving the barbell upward. Then something shifted. Perhaps it was a microscopic adjustment in her position, or a surge of determination from some deep reserve of strength. The barbell began moving again, slowly but steadily, passing through her knees and entering the final phase of the lift. The crowd began to cheer before she had even completed the movement, recognizing that she had passed the most difficult portion. But Sarah couldn't hear them. Her entire world had narrowed to the weight in her hands and the burning sensation in every muscle. With a final surge of power that seemed to come from her very soul, Sarah locked out the lift. She stood tall, 500 pounds suspended from her grip, her body shaking slightly from the monumental effort, but her posture proud and triumphant. The gym erupted in celebration. People who had never met were hugging each other, swept up in the emotion of witnessing something truly extraordinary. Tyler's video was already being uploaded to every platform he could think of. The caption reading, "You won't believe what happened at the gym today." But perhaps the most significant moment came from an unexpected source. Madison, the woman who had mocked Sarah's appearance and background just hours earlier, was crying. Not tears of sadness or frustration, but tears of recognition that she had witnessed something that transcended social class, economic status, and all the superficial markers she had used to judge people her entire life. Sarah held the weight for several seconds, not for show but to ensure complete control. When she finally lowered it, the sound of 500 pounds hitting the platform reverberated through the gym like thunder. She stepped back from the barbell and looked around at the crowd that had gathered to watch her fail. But they were no longer the same people who had dismissed her when she walked through the door. They had been changed by what they witnessed, forced to confront their own prejudices and preconceptions about strength, ability, and worthiness. Jake was the first to speak, his voice filled with genuine awe. "That was the most incredible thing I've ever seen in a gym," he said. 500 pounds. At your body weight. That's world-class level. Sarah smiled quietly, finally allowing herself to feel the satisfaction of the achievement. She had lifted 500 pounds, a weight that represented not just physical strength, but the culmination of years of hard work, determination, and refusing to accept other people's limitations on what she could accomplish. As she began removing the weight plates from the barbell, several people stepped forward to help. The same people who had watched her load the weights alone now insisted on sharing the task, as if helping her clean up was a small way to be part of what had just happened. "Where did you learn to lift like that?" someone asked. "How long have you been training?" asked another. "Will you teach me?" came from a third voice. Sarah answered their questions patiently, her natural humility unchanged by her extraordinary performance. She explained her training background, her techniques, and her philosophy of consistent work over flashy shortcuts. But even as she spoke, she could see that her words were being received differently now. When she had walked into the gym that morning, these same people would have dismissed her advice as the rambling of someone who didn't belong. Now they hung on every word, recognizing that they were in the presence of someone who had achieved something they had thought impossible. The transformation was complete, but Sarah knew it was just the beginning of something much larger than a single workout. 500 pounds, every detail mattered. Her stance was perfect, the result of hundreds of repetitions and constant refinement. Her feet were positioned for maximum power transfer from the ground through her entire body. Her shoulders were set, her back straight, her head in neutral position. The crowd was so quiet that individual sounds became noticeable. The hum of the air conditioning, the distant traffic outside, someone's stomach growling nervously. Sarah began her pull. The weight didn't move. For a moment, it seemed like the barbell was welded to the platform, as if 500 pounds was simply too much for any human to lift. Sarah strained against the resistance, her entire body engaged in the effort, but the plates remained stubbornly on the floor. Then, almost imperceptibly, the barbell began to rise. The movement was so slow that it was barely visible at first, but gradually, millimeter by millimeter, the weight separated from the platform. Sarah's face showed the enormous effort required. Her jaw clenched, her breathing controlled but labored. Every muscle fiber recruited for the task. The lift progressed in stages, each small victory followed by what seemed like an impossible next challenge. Past her ankles where the weight felt heavier than ever, through her shins where the leverage was worst and the bar wanted to drift away from her body. 3 months later, Sarah walked through the same glass doors of Elite Fitness Center, but everything had changed. The receptionist, who had once looked at her with barely concealed disdain, now greeted her with genuine warmth and respect. "Good morning, Sarah," she said brightly. "Your usual platform is ready." The gym had transformed around her, not physically but socially. Where once she had faced whispered comments and skeptical stares, she now received nods of acknowledgement and requests for advice. Her workout had become legendary within the gym community, the story growing with each telling until it reached mythical proportions. Tyler's video of her 500-pound deadlift had gone viral beyond anyone's expectations. It had been shared millions of times across social media platforms, spawning countless reaction videos, analysis breakdowns, and inspirational posts. The simple caption, "Never judge a book by its cover," had resonated with people around the world who had faced similar dismissal and underestimation. But the video's impact went far beyond social media metrics. It had sparked conversations about classism in fitness, the importance of judging people by their actions rather than their appearance, and the hidden strength that existed in unexpected places. Sarah made her way to the weight area, where several gym members were already training. Jake waved from the squat rack, having become not just a friend but a training partner. He had been humbled by her performance and had asked if she would help him improve his own deadlift technique. "Ready for today's session?" he asked as she approached. Sarah nodded, setting down her gym bag in the same spot where she had once stood alone and mocked. Now it was considered prime real estate in the gym, the place where magic had happened, where limits had been shattered and expectations overturned. The platform where she had lifted 500 pounds had become something of a shrine. The gym management had installed a small plaque commemorating the achievement, though Sarah had initially protested the attention. She preferred to let her actions speak rather than her accolades. As she began her warm-up routine, Sarah noticed Madison approaching hesitantly. The relationship between the two women had undergone the most dramatic transformation of all. Madison had spent weeks grappling with the realization that her entire worldview had been built on false assumptions. "Sarah," Madison said quietly, "I wanted to ask you something." Sarah looked up from her stretching, her expression open and patient. Despite Madison's initial hostility, Sarah held no grudges. She understood that people's reactions often said more about their own insecurities than about her worthiness. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened that day," Madison continued, her voice carrying a vulnerability that would have been impossible before witnessing Sarah's lift. "About how wrong I was about everything. I want to apologize, but I also want to ask for help." The request surprised Sarah. Madison had everything that society said should matter: wealth, status, connections, expensive trainers at her disposal. But she was asking for help from someone she had once dismissed as unworthy of sharing the same space. "I want to learn to lift properly," Madison explained. "Not for social media, not to impress anyone, but because I realized I don't actually know what real strength looks like." "Will you teach me?" Sarah smiled, remembering her own journey from carrying lumber at construction sites to deadlifting world-class weights. Everyone had to start somewhere, and everyone deserved the chance to discover what they were capable of. "Of course," she replied, "but we start with the basics. No ego, no shortcuts, just consistent work." Madison nodded eagerly, finally understanding that true strength couldn't be purchased or inherited. It had to be earned through dedication and sweat. As Sarah began teaching Madison proper deadlift form, a small crowd gathered to watch. But this time the attention was respectful, educational rather than mocking. Several other gym members had asked Sarah to coach them, recognizing that technique mattered more than expensive equipment or designer workout clothes. Brad, the trainer who had initially tried to redirect her to cardio machines, now regularly sought her advice on powerlifting programming for his clients. He had swallowed his pride and admitted that his initial assessment had been completely wrong, based on prejudice rather than professional judgment. "You've changed this place," he told her during a break between training sessions. "People train differently now, with more respect for each other and for the process." Sarah looked around the gym, seeing the truth in his observation. The atmosphere had shifted from exclusive and judgmental to inclusive and supportive. People who had never spoken to each other were sharing equipment and offering encouragement. The rigid social hierarchies that had once defined the space had given way to something more genuine and collaborative. But perhaps the most significant change was invisible to the casual observer. Sarah had not just broken a physical barrier when she lifted 500 pounds, she had broken psychological barriers that had limited both herself and everyone who witnessed her achievement. The story of her lift had spread far beyond Elite Fitness Center. She had received messages from people around the world who identified with her experience of being underestimated and dismissed. Young women from working-class backgrounds saw her as proof that their circumstances didn't define their potential. Athletes who had been told they weren't the right type for their sport found inspiration in her example. A local university had even invited her to speak to their exercise science students about the psychology of strength, training, and the dangers of making assumptions based on appearance. She had initially been nervous about public speaking, but had found her voice when talking about topics she was passionate about. Standing on the same platform where she had once been mocked, now surrounded by people eager to learn from her example, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The 500-pound deadlift had been impressive, but the real victory was subtler and more profound. She had forced an entire community to confront their biases and prejudices. She had demonstrated that strength comes in unexpected packages, that determination matters more than privilege, and that the only limits that truly matter are the ones we impose on ourselves. As she loaded the barbell for her first working set, Sarah smiled at the irony of her situation. She had come to Elite Fitness Center simply because it had heavier weights than her old gym. She had never intended to prove a point or change anyone's mind. She had just wanted to train properly. But sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin with someone quietly doing what they know they're capable of, regardless of what others think is possible. Sarah's deadlift had been just that. Not a performance or a statement, but simply a woman discovering what she could accomplish when given the right tools and the freedom to try. The weight on the barbell today read 365 pounds, a number that had once seemed impossible, but now felt routine. Sarah approached it with the same calm confidence she had shown that first day, secure in the knowledge that she belonged exactly where she was, lifting exactly what she was capable of lifting. As she gripped the bar and prepared to pull, she could hear Madison counting off her own warm-up reps nearby, applying the lessons she had learned about patience, consistency, and respect for the process. The transformation was complete, not just for Sarah, but for everyone whose life had been touched by her example of quiet strength and unshakable determination.